My name is Charles Bone. Today is August the 2nd of 2017, and I'm in Nashville, Tennessee today to interview Millard Oakley, Millard Von Oakley, who is a great lawyer and great business person from the Upper Cumberland, especially Overton County. I'm honored to have the opportunity to ask him these questions today and be a part of this. And this is as we know, for the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Millard, we're so happy to have you here with us this morning, and I want to just ask some questions and look forward to having your history of record on this video. First of all, start with your full name.
My full name is Millard Von Oakley.
And tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Overton County, Tennessee, May the 11th, 1930. I'm 87 right now.
Well, we
not in a hospital. We didn't have a hospital in the county.
I was going to say that there were no hospitals in Overton County at that time.
No, I was the youngest of seven and was all born at home.
Right. And tell us about your parents. Where were they and what they do, and how long had they been in Overton County?
My parents were from Overton County. Their parents were. The farm I live on right above that is the Oakley Cemetery, and my great-great-grandfather was buried there in 1840. And then I don't know when they first got there from North Carolina, but the farm I live on is a pioneer, 200-year farm, and it was given to Gilbert Christian for service during the Revolutionary War, and the deed was recorded before Tennessee was a state, and so it's been in that same.
Been in your family forever?
No, not all of it. The Christians had it for 170, 80 years, and then my brother and I we owned part of it. That was actually a part of the Christian tract too, but that part of the county from starting on 84, the first part of that section was owned by the Cullums, and the second part by the Christians. That whole stretch. Old Judge Cullums buried across the street where I live. He was in Congress in the during the Civil War.
And tell some of the folks on this video won't know where Overton County is, so tell us where.
Overton County was originally a part of Jackson County. Jackson County was named after President Jackson, of course, and Overton County was carved out of that, as was Putnam, as was Clay, Pickett, and Fentress, most of Fentress. Clay County, actually, Cordell Hull was born in Overton County, but it's now Pickett County. I'm not too far from the county line. Static, Kentucky is just up the road a piece.
And tell us the names of your parents.
My father was Thomas Millard Oakley, and my mother was Cordy Von Oakley.
And what did they do? What did they have a farm?
My mother was just 7 children and usually had some cousins there, so she was just a housewife. My father worked at a sawmill primarily, and later was kind of a partner in one.
And were they active in the community up there, like you?
Oh, sure. Dad was very active. He had no formal education, but he was smart. My mother had no formal education, but she was really pretty bright too.
And you had 6 siblings?
6 siblings. They're all gone.
All gone. Okay. Well, tell us about your childhood, where you lived, how you grew up, where you went to high school or junior high?
I went to, obviously, Livingston. We moved to town about the year I was born, and we didn't have, first few years of my life, we didn't have inside plumbing, but later on did. Went to grammar school there and went to, they say, Livingston Academy. It's not an academy at all. Academy, as I understand it, denotes a private school. When I graduated from high school in 1947, it was then Women's Christian association or something owned it. Livingston did not have a public high school until 1947.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that, but they still call it Livingston Academy.
That's
now,
right. They've just
Yep.
picked it. Sounds better. Sounds more academic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had another high school up at Alpine where Governor Roberts was born, and so we had two high schools, and they closed the one at Alpine. It was primarily a Presbyterian high school.
That's great. How many people were in your graduating class from high school?
I don't really recall. I think about 65, give or take 60 or 70.
Yeah.
The last reunion is 12 of us left, or 14. And some of them weren't there, but
Sure.
most of them, more than half of
Great.
them.
And were you? What did you have any major accomplishments in high school?
None at all.
None at all.
See, that was during the war years.
Right.
There was no athletics. I couldn't have played ball anyway. I was always awkward as hell.
And then so there's a story about you going to college. Did some of your brothers and sisters go to college?
They did. My older brother, Turley Oakley, was director of education down in Clarksville till he retired, maybe 30 years. My sisters were school teachers. My brother Bob did not finish college. He went to Tech some, but he didn't really finish.
That's a pretty major accomplishment for your parents who'd never been to college.
Yeah, but my mother was really the driving force, and then it was a tough time for him, really.
So where did you go to college?
I went to Cumberland.
In Lebanon.
In Lebanon, yes, sir.
And how did you do there?
Not too good. I passed, barely. Well, I wouldn't. I'm embarrassed to tell this, but the truth. I went to Cumberland. You could go there. You live in the dormitory, and one big room in the middle, and on each other. And I think room, board, and tuition was $200-something a quarter. And I went there, and it was my first time to be out of town much, really. I was 17. I was graduating from high school when I was 17 and went down there. And my mother, it was a Baptist school, and my mother kind of wanted me to go to a good Christian school, and I'm afraid she missed the mark a little bit. I remember the first quarter I failed 101 English and 2 or 3 others, and Mr. Pentecost, looks like I wasn't going to get to go back the second quarter. I was going to fail out. And he called me in, and he started off with that, well, there are some other things you might want to do, and on and on and on, and I'm kind of getting the message. And he finally said, well, I'm afraid you're just not college material. And I told him that I just couldn't let that happen on account of my mother. It would break her heart. And so he said, well, we're going to give you another shot at it. And I started doing a little more studying and made it work out all right.
Now, what were you doing before, rather than study? What kind of activities were you involved in?
Well, I learned how to drink beer. I learned how to, play some poker, shoot dice, a few things like that. It was very active there, and all the service people were there. I was the youngest one in the thing. See.
A lot of guys coming home from the war.
Yeah.
Were there.
But I worked prior to going to college. I had a business, and
Tell us about that.
I had a shoe shine stand of three chairs next to Spec Hardware. I rented that from them.
In Livingston?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I bought it from a colored boy who moved into Detroit, an African-American boy, and bought it from him. And I did real well with it, too. Then everybody had leather shoes. There were no tennis shoes and fabric shoes. Everybody wore leather shoes. Every barbershop had a shine man and a shine boy in it. And I did some other entrepreneurial things there. And we did all right. When I started to Cumberland, I had a cigar box full of money. And
Did you really?
yeah.
That's great. Now, can you still shine a shoe?
I can, and milk a cow, too. I milked a cow
You had
twice.
plenty of experience at that, huh?
Yeah. I shouldn't tell this, but I will. It's kind of My mother's not here, so it won't make much difference. But a fellow approached me when I was in the shine business, and he told me what I was 16 at the time, or 15 or 16, I don't remember. He said, well, you could sell prophylactics here, and they were called rubbers back then, and it would be a good place. People would go to the drugstore, and he hid them and all of that. He said, if you get a shoe shine, you could sell them some merchandise, and I did. And man, it was a land office business there a while.
That's great.
I had all the kids in high school buying them. None of us ever, I never had used one, but it was, I don't know how long after that, but I was selling them long before I ever used one.
And did you close down your shop when you went to college?
No, I sold it to James Ward, who's a dentist, who's deceased now.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. So did you work while you were in college?
I did. The main thing I did was really worked out real well. I got that dormitory. I thought I'd do better and convince my parents. But my brothers were doing all right then, so I had a little money then. And I moved out to Hazelwood. It's a place where, the dentist, Madam Fly, his name was Fly, and he was a dentist. And his wife, he referred to her as Madam Fly, had a boarding house there, and a kid where they served food, a lot of food, and mostly on Sundays. And I lived over the kitchen with John Moore from Memphis. Out the back, they had a little tiny cottage, and Jim Henry lived there, Jim and his wife.
Now, tell us who Jim Henry is. A lot of people will know him.
Jim Henry was actually from Pulaski, went to school at Cumberland. He graduated. I graduated in December, and I think he graduated a few months earlier. And he and John McCord moved to Tullahoma. Jim's brother was Joe Henry, of some prominence on the Supreme Court and Adjutant General. And there's two fellows from Missouri on the other side. Yeah.
Now, how did you went to undergraduate school at Cumberland and then got a law degree there all over a period of a few years?
Yeah, well, back then, Charles, you didn't have to have a degree to go to college. I don't have a baccalaureate degree like you've got in most lawyers. Back then in Cumberland, and it was starting about the time I got there, it was an ABA approved school, but you had to have so many hours to get in. I think we had to take some little test or something. And so I had that there, and they admitted me to Cumberland. I graduated when I was graduating in 51. I was 21.
Wow.
And I passed the bar following that. So I had a license to practice when I was 22. I didn't know very much, but I had a license to practice.
Why did you decide to be a lawyer?
You know, I'd been in the courthouse a little. I had court on Saturdays usually, and I had an uncle who was a lawyer, and he wore a coat and tie, and I just tall, kind of a stately-looking fella. As I get older.
What was his name?
James Alexander Oakley, J.A.O. Oakley. He was later General Sessions judge.
In Overton County?
Yeah, uh-huh.
So that was a little bit of an inspiration for you to
little bit,
and
then I didn't know what else to do, yeah. Really. I knew I didn't want part of that sawmill.
And you didn't want to milk cows if you did that?
I told my daddy I wasn't too good to, but I never tended when I got back home. I milked a cow some after I got out of law school. We still had a milk cow, and I'd go home and milk. Dad just felt like we ought to have a cow, and right there in town. And then when we moved a little different area, we kept a lady, Miss Stevens, had a pasture, and we put a cow there, and she would help me milk. I was a little young then, and she'd take part of the milk, and she had the pasture, and I'd come down and help milk. And I can still milk a cow if I can get down. I'm too stiff now, but I did a pretty good job then, really.
I bet. Now, what about, do you remember any of the courses from law school or professors? That'd be a hard test for me. Do you remember
Sam Gilreath, I never will forget him. Sam was, he married into the Carruthers family. They called him Judge Gilreath, and I assumed that it developed that he had had one course that had 9 months at Cumberland. Was his, but he was the smartest, brightest guy, and can demonstrate things better just talking to you. You know, he wrote History of the Lawsuit, and he sat down, and then of course we had the Gibson suits and Chancery. I remember Alfred Adams was chancellor in Nashville. He taught procedure, and we had that Gibson suits Chancery. If I were practicing law actively, I hope we still wish we had it. Just enacted this code pleading. I was in the legislature at the time. I was against it, but they've enacted it.
So when did you finish law school? What year?
1951.
1951. Now, did you actually take a bar exam and pass the bar exam? Or
sure, you had to take the bar. I finished in December of 51, and that was an odd time. Most people graduated in June. We just had a small graduating class. We had one female student, and certainly no African Americans. You know, the corporate charter provided segregation in it. And
for Cumberland Law School, all of Cumberland.
But they started admitting women before Harvard did.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you remember who the woman was in your class?
Yeah, Patricia Kaufman.
Okay.
I think she's deceased now.
Wow.
I was the youngest.
So you ended up passing the bar then in 52?
Yes, sir.
And did you go back to Livingston to open a law office?
No, I was there. I took while I was waiting, some way I didn't get to take the bar till June. And that 2 year, that 2 quarters there, I didn't have anything to do, really. I didn't have any business, you know. So I went to Tech for a little bit there. And
you mean Tennessee Tech?
Yes, and then what I really did that year, I'd read about the Constitutional Convention being held, and it was of some importance, and hadn't had one since the Civil War. And so I saw that, I just decided I ran for that. And
in 1952?
Yes, sir. I was elected when I was 22, yeah. And the convention was in 53.
Right.
So I was just awed by the people there. I look back now, and there was such an array of talent there. We had 3 ex-governors.
Tell us some of who was in that Constitutional Convention.
Prentice Cooper was president. Ben Hooper from Cock County, who had been governor, and then from Lawrenceburg, Lewis County, Jim McCord was there. Cecil Sims was there. Cecil ran for president of it. Raymond Denny was there. Harlan Dotson was there. There's a fellow named Chitwood that lived out on Donaldson Pike, had a great big house.
That's an all-star group, boy.
Bill Miller was there, who was later a federal judge. I tried cases before him. I could just go down. Lewis Pope was there from Sumner County, lived in that White House on the hill out there.
Right.
And you just go down. Walter Chandler from Memphis, he'd been mayor and Congress. It just looked like who's who, except me. And
how did you get elected? What did you have anybody?
Just ran for office.
Did you have anybody run against you?
Yeah, I did. Member of the county court there, and I got elected. He wasn't much of an opponent, really. So Bill Peeler got beat that year. I got to kid him. Bill Peeler ran for it. Bill and I roomed in law school a little while together. And
Bill Peeler from Waverly.
Yes, lawyer Peeler from Waverly, but really from McEwen. He says he's Waverly, but he's really from McEwen. And a fellow named Larkin, who had a sawmill or something, because we called him Cross Tie at this convention. But you could go. I wish I jotted some of those. It just goes on and on and on. Prominent Chambliss from Chattanooga, and Prescott. There was one Roman woman, two, Molly Todd from Nashville.
Yeah.
And some lady from Memphis, I think. I can't remember her name.
That's amazing.
But you just name them. There's several there that went on to be judges.
Sure. And while you were in the convention, did you have a law office open somewhere?
No.
You just did that full time.
Well, for that period of time,
right?
It was quite a treat for me. I had enough money to buy.
Were you the youngest one there?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
At that time, I would have been 23. I was by far. Yeah, Ben Hooper was probably the oldest. He was in his 80s.
And what did you all do at the convention? What action did you take?
Well, it would take time wouldn't permit that, but we changed the governor's term from 2 to 4, and changed the legislature's pay from $4 a day to $10 and 5 expenses or vice versa, $15 a day, and several other procedural things where you couldn't just go to the legislature and pass a private act and strip somebody out of their office and all that kind of thing. There's a lot of that going on prior to then.
But you made friends there for life.
I did. Jack Henry was in school a little ahead of me. He's Joe's brother.
Right.
And at that point, Clement was governor, and General Joe, had an office in the Capitol. And so we got the free use of that, and telephone and all that kind of thing. And it was really a fun thing.
And did you all stay downtown, live at the one of the hotels?
Stayed at the Hermitage Hotel with $7 a day.
And
right
probably
across,
had some nighttime activities there too, right?
I didn't have enough money to participate much, but a little bit, not much. I lived right across the street, and I couldn't go to the alley and things like that. I wanted to, but I didn't have the money to go. I'd go down and kind of look around and get invited once or twice.
Now, were you a member of a political party?
Democrat.
Well,
I don't know. My family, I didn't know there was anything except Democrats in my area.
No Republicans anywhere around in the Upper Cumberland?
Not much then. There was a few. Luke Medley from Cookville was very prominent and a nice guy. And we never had any Republican primaries till the last few years.
All right, so that's 1953. What happened after that convention?
I started practicing law with a fellow named Tony Maxey. He was originally from Clay County. His father was Black Maxey, and Benton McMillan were partners from Salina. And of course, Benton ran for governor and was elected. He's the only governor that, one of the two, of course, Albert Roberts from Livingston, and Ben Hooper beat him in 1920 or something like that. And Governor McCord was showing his age a little bit, not much, but just a little. I think he'd had some little problem. But I got acquainted with Jack Goldsmith. He had Goldsmith's department store in Memphis. That was the biggest one there.
Right.
And John Monte Donico, who had Memphis Bank and Trust. Gosh, if I had a little time, I could think of a lot more.
Sure, well, you can remember a lot more of them than I can imagine.
I looked at the picture yesterday.
Well, now, so what about, did you, let's take a sidestep. What about family? Did you get married at some point?
I did in my first wife is deceased, but I had a divorce prior to that. My present wife is a lawyer and a nurse, got a master's in some kind of nursing, awful. She cross-examines me and psychoanalyzes me daily.
And what is her name?
Her name was Joyce Jones. We just call her JJ. Everybody knows her by JJ.
Right, and y'all been married for a number of years.
Yeah, she's a little younger than I am.
Yeah.
Maybe I guess 18 years or something.
Y'all have children, or?
No, I haven't. I had a child by a previous marriage. I have one daughter and one granddaughter. My daughter lives in Hilton Head, and my granddaughter is going to be a freshman at Tech this year.
Oh, really? Okay. So, what? Tell us your daughter's name and your granddaughter's name.
My daughter's name is Melissa Lynn Smith, and my granddaughter's name Kendall Vaughn Smith, same as my middle name.
Great, that's good. So, and now, JJ is a lawyer.
Yes.
And but does she practice law now?
No.
So it's been a
no.
while.
I got acquainted with her, and while she just started law school, and I'd pick her up at law school. It was so strange to me, that they'd have sweats, multitudes of girls, and I had a blue coat just like I've got on now. You get at that point, they had a Palm Beach outlet store up at Rockwood.
Right.
I know you're probably old enough to remember that when you're going up Old 70 on the left there, and you could get those. I don't know what the coats were, but they were Palm Beach. I wore them year round, and people in law school then, not in the summer so much, but a lot of times during the I can tell Judge Gilreath kind of seems like he liked people wearing coats and ties pretty well. Same way with Arthur Weeks, who was president.
That made a difference at how you looked.
Yeah, they kind of nobody wore shorts
Ever.
Or T-shirts.
Right.
Yeah, you'd wear maybe a just go shirt and a short sleeve shirt in the summer.
Yeah.
There's certainly no air conditioning in the law school. It's old Crothers Hall there, and it was built. Marvin Snow, a lawyer, and a fellow bought all the brick out of it. I built a house in Livingston out of that. That brick was, that building was built right before it was built with slave labor, and you could tell that the bricks were kind of handmade.
Wow.
And it was built. I think it was built in 18. I should know, but I can't remember. It was 1850, I think. No, school started in 1840. So I think it was built after the school started, I think. Mm-hmm. I can't remember.
And when did they tear it down, or when did you tear it down?
No. They tore it down, and we bought the brick. They put a bank there.
Okay, got it. So you opened up your law office in Livingston and Overton County in
53.
In 53, and what kind of business did you have as a lawyer? What kind of clients
did
you have?
Very little, but it was interesting. I learned how to write a deed. We got $5 for a deed and $50 for a divorce, uncontested. Had the shirt factory there in Livingston then, and there was about 800 or 900 women worked there, and divorces were pretty prevalent. And so we got, and just rough and tumble stuff. I remember once, and a fella came in, he's in the oil business, and told me to just draw a side draft to do something, send an oil lease or something. Mr. Maxey wasn't there, and I got my books out, my form books, and I couldn't find a form I didn't know what a side draft was. And Mr. Maxey got back, and he said, oh, well, he just took his file and paid the order of Joe Blow and signed his name. And so I didn't have any trouble.
Learned a little law there, right?
Yeah.
That's great. So you all were just on the square working, and you have any car wreck cases?
Yeah, some. I wasn't getting any serious cases much. We got a lot of. At that point in time, there was no public defenders. The young lawyers were appointed, and I was grateful for that. That gave me some trial practice, and that you could just get all the cases you wanted of that type. But it didn't have the dockets weren't long. There were no drug cases, anything like that. And the assistant attorney generals were Scott Camp and Buck Hagan. Scott went on to be chancellor and Buck circuit judge, and John Mitchell was the judge, and the district attorney was Baxter Key. And they would, they just sat down, and it wasn't none of this discovery. They said, well, here's the file, and here's what I talked to the witness, here's what he said about it. And you knew about the lawsuit. You didn't have to file any papers. They just all told the truth. And I think it worked out pretty well, quite frankly. But I can tell cases about, all right, I'm going to tell you a case about people I tell. It's the truth, but I've told it 100 times or more. Anytime people will listen much. But I'd been appointed to represent 3 young men. I was getting a little trial experience and not enough. For burning a loopers, I think his name, he lived in Dry Hollow. Everybody in that area, that Dry Hollow, was either loopers or nards. And these boys were charged with burning his haystacks. They were, back then, if you're maybe old enough to remember, but they put the hay around a pole so the cattle could eat it and it'd fall down. It ricked it around the pole. And there's some thought that he might have reported those boys for something. I never did know about that. And we were trying the lawsuit, and Mr. Lee was on the stand, and I remember it as well as it were yesterday. And I thought I was just making a lot of headway, and it developed, it was at night, the alleged burning, and it was rainy then. It was. He said, oh yes, it was raining. It was a dark night. Yes, Mr. Looper. And I went on and on and on about that. And he, yes sir, yes sir. And I finally made the fatal mistake. I said, Mr. Looper, just how far can you see after dark? He scratched his head and he said, Millard Vaughn, I can see the moon. How far is that? And boys were convicted. They weren't in position to testify. But I was reminded about what Judge Guillory used to say: if you prove your point, quit. Don't
ask that last question.
No, he told that funny story. He told it all the time about the common law. I remember about the common law. This case was tried in England, and he was illustrating it by this case. The fellow was being tried in, I don't know if this is true or not, but Judge Guillory, maybe he was just trying to make a point. The fellow's being tried for mayhem. He'd bitten off another fellow's ear. Have you heard that? Mm-mm. In law school? And the lawyers cross-examined the principal witness and he said yes, and he said, well, did you see this? Did you see that? And finally said, well, did you see him, this fellow bite his ear off? He said, no, sir. And they went on a little longer, and he finally said, well, how do you know he bit it off? And he said, of course, I saw him spit it out. And Judge Guillory would tell that story. Now, I know most lawyers have heard it, so you got to know when to quit. But I still went on after that.
And I assume your law practice covered several counties up through there and went to Cook.
Well, not at first, but it did later. There was not a lawyer in Pickett County. Okay. That was just up the road a little. There's none there. And in Salina, there was Renault's, and that was pretty much it. And in Jamestown was Reagan, Neal, and Craven, and Turner and Case. And now there's lawyers on every corner.
And you were right on the Kentucky line. Did you ever do any business over in Kentucky?
Yeah, but Albany sometimes.
Yeah.
Jimmy Hicks, I'd associate him.
Got it.
He's a good lawyer. Up Somerset, Kentucky, I tried a case up there.
Now, you had a great interest in politics after you were in that constitutional convention.
I did.
Did you finally run for the legislature?
I ran for the legislature. And
when were you elected?
56, I guess. Yeah. 56. 57. I remember the 57 legislature. We had quite an interesting situation with the Schoolfield impeachment trial.
All right, tell us about that.
And it went on and on. And
Schofield was from Chattanooga?
Yes, he was a judge in Chattanooga. Ran against Clement in 54. This 57.
For governor.
For governor.
Right.
And had some things not too complimentary to say about Governor Clement. And incidentally, a lawyer, prominent lawyer, recently wrote a book, A Rush to Judgment. Well, from Chattanooga. What's his?
Summers?
Yeah, Jerry Summers. Jerry Summers, yeah. He wrote a book, and it's really a good book. It kind of just tells the history of Schofield and something about the bar there. And I got acquainted with some interesting people. Bookie Turner, who was sheriff, and I liked his brother Gene.
But you all voted to impeach?
I did on 2 grounds, yeah, and the Senate affirmed it.
Right. But it wasn't really a trial, you know. Clement was after him, and Judge Schofield had made some very serious errors. I don't know. I look back on one of them that Jerry Summers referred to in his book. His court officer raised money for him, bought him a red Pontiac car, and I don't know now whether that would have been, he got it from lawyers, made enough money to buy Judge Schofield a car. And then he seemed to consort with people that were kind of in the gray area some, and then he had it based on what was testified to. I saw we got to read all the investigating reports and all that, and that was my first. The Clement, in order to show real fairness, appointed Big Jack Norman and John J. Hooker as the prosecutors, and my first acquaintance with John J. and he was very flamboyant and dressed. John J. Hooker Jr.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Not Big John. I got
Right.
acquainted with him later, but Big Jack Norman, and he was a very persuasive fella, and they knew how to put the case on.
Sure.
And he really should have been impeached.
So how long did you serve in the legislature?
I served from that time up till 63. Yeah, 63. I had 4 terms there, consecutive terms.
So you were a pretty busy guy trying to practice law, be in the legislature, traveling back and forth?
I didn't drive back and forth. I stayed down here.
Okay.
But it was different then. Remember the legislature back then, Betty Davis is one woman in the legislature. See, I never tried juries to a woman in the jury box. At that point, see, you didn't have women on juries till the 60s. Women did not, it was discretionary. If a woman was served in the jury, she could say, I don't believe I want to serve. And she didn't have to show up. So they just quit. The jurors were all, in my area, all white male. There wasn't very many blacks or African Americans there. But it was just a different one. In the legislature, there were no African Americans until after Baker versus Carr.
Right.
And during my 4 terms, there was not a black person in. You see, then if you know this, but like Davidson County had 6 or 7, and they'd run, and the top 6 or 7 vote-getters were in the legislature, and the legislature really was dominated by younger white lawyers, really. No. See, when I was the first term in this state capitol up here, it was colored men, white men.
Sure.
And,
now let's see. So was that? Now Jared Maddox was from Cookeville. Was he the lieutenant governor while you were?
He was at once, and then twice, and then Bill Baird from Lebanon.
Okay.
But the legislature, I was there with Bill Peeler, Jim Henry, Ira Adkins. Most of my old buddies are gone except Sam Kennedy from from Columbia. He's still alive. I talked
Right.
to him a month ago, I guess. But Sam was one of my better friends in school.
Mm.
Sam's maybe a little, I'm 87. He's probably 89 and 90 maybe, I don't know.
Well, you were working hard during that period of time as a lawyer and a legislator
Well,
and a politician.
Wasn't working all that hard. I didn't have, I'd tried mostly personal injuries, and we took anything, walked in the door. Charles, didn't make a difference what it was. It was Clayton Sherman had a trust act, and we'd take it till we found out what it was about, you know.
Right.
And we just tried everything. There was no, you see, younger lawyers, now I've tried many a case for possessing whiskey. See, they had the bone dry law then, and if you possessed an appreciable amount of whiskey, Judge Roberts called it an appreciable, but appreciable amount of whiskey, and it was usually considered to be about a pint or a fifth, but I mean, it was if you had it more than a case, it was a felony.
Is that right?
Yes, sir. I've tried unlawful cohabitation, where a man living with a woman not being married. See, that young people don't know. I've tried those cases. The sheriff would want to get you, and you had a girlfriend you spend the night with, living as a kind of man and wife, and the sheriff would testify, well, I saw Charles coming out early in the morning, he's pulling his pants up, or he's putting his pants on, or something.
What was the penalty for those offenses?
It depended. Back then, usually the juries fixed those cases back then, not too much, really. But it was always a fine, and if usually just a fine.
Yeah.
I never tried many of those, but there were several of them, and a lot of whiskey cases all turned usually on illegal searches. Hmm. I took one to the Supreme Court over an illegal search because Judge Mitchell, he hated to be reversed so bad, and but he was a prince of a guy, and it was Talley versus the state. It's a reported case, and on an illegal search where they searched a fellow he was a client of mine, he was making whiskey really, and he searched his house without a proper warrant, and I was so glad to see the Supreme Court reverse him. I couldn't wait till I saw him. But he was.
Now were you? Let's see. Were you on the Clement Ellington bandwagon?
Yes,
Were you
yes, sir.
For Buford Ellington when he ran against and beat John J. Hooker?
No, I was for John Jay that year.
You were for John Jay
because of his father primarily, Mr. Hooker. His father, man, he was a powerhouse.
Yeah.
I heard him try a lawsuit there in Cookville, and the witness would just eat him alive. Oh, well, thank you so much. And he just, he was a. I thought he and Big Jack Norman. I don't know whether we have lawyers like that in Nashville now or not. We don't have as much litigation. You see, I never did an arbitration or mediation in my life.
I'm not. That you just go to the courthouse and.
Yeah, or sometimes
get it going.
No, if you had a good lawyer on the other side, you could get it settled. Sometimes judges would make you, first time.
Now we're going to take a break, but about your next, the next segment of your life was moving to Washington, wasn't it? About in the early '60s. Is there anything?
70. Oh yeah.
So
you want to
take a break now and then?
Oh, you want to go on a little longer?
Yeah, if you can.
Sure.
Okay. Well, so let's talk about you've been pretty modest, but you were very involved in politics in the '60s and
yeah, pretty much.
In the early '70s.
Joe Evans had when Big Al went to the Senate, we got Joe Evans as our congressman in those counties up there, and Judge Officer told him I'd be a good guy to help him. I didn't have much business anyway, really. I was doing all right, but I wasn't making a lot of money. And so I helped him in those 2 or 3 counties up there. And of course, his name was Evins, and up home they spell their name Evans. But there's lots of Evanses, and I remember putting those fans out of all the churches then. There was no air conditioning. Those wooden fans like that.
Yes, sir.
And somebody showed me one not long ago, and we filled the churches full of them, courthouses and everywhere. And it had Joe's picture on one side and Jesus on the other. And you'd fan and you'd say, Jesus, Joe, Jesus, Joe. and he won pretty handily, of course, and wasn't really much. I forget who ran against him that time. Somebody from Cheville, I think. I can't remember.
That was when Albert Gore Sr. went to the Senate.
That's right.
Joe L. Evans was elected to take his spot.
Well, actually, Joe was elected in '76. He was there, but they changed the boundary of the district.
So you just volunteered for Joe L. Evans and helped him get elected?
Yeah, and then took a lot of credit for it.
Right. And he then asked you to come to Washington.
No, he would offer me from time. I got along pretty well with Joe, quite frankly. He put me on his bank board in Smithville, the First National Bank, and it was an interesting board, and it was really kind of dull, but they'd have meetings, and I'm not saying this just factually. The chairman would always open the meeting with a long prayer, always, and that was foreign to me. But they were good people, and I was on his board. And then he'd always offer, well, if you ever want to come to Washington, kind of thing. He's chairman of the Public Works he was on the Appropriations Committee, and chairman of that, chairman of the House Select Committee on Small Business, and he stopped in Cookeville office in I'd formed a partnership with Arnold Cameron and Eugene Jarrett. I'd always practiced by myself. To then, that was 1970, I guess, and 70. And Mr. Evans was by the office one day and said, "Well, get ready when you want to, and come up. You can be general counsel of this Hill Committee." And told me a little about it. And I'd been tried in a grueling murder lawsuit. Just, by God, I was so tired of it. And I told him, and I said, just put me on the payroll. And so I loaded up and went to Washington and stayed from 71 to 73.
Now that had to be an interesting experience.
Not really.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Dull as dishwater. It was, I didn't have, we had several of the laziest lawyers I ever saw. And the biggest decision of the day for me was where to eat lunch usually. I didn't do anything like really, not much.
Well, now
I did whatever Joe asked me to do.
Yeah, and that's when Watergate started in the '72 campaign. You were up there for the start of all of that.
Yeah, I was, and I was there with the impeachment thing, and Joe was really a political genius in a way. He'd get those. He had a mail system like you've never seen. He didn't come back to the district much, but he could write. He had Bill Keel was his administrative assistant. First administrative assistant one of my better friends was Bob Moore, and but he had the letters that come in. You answered. They call them E to be of H. That's endeavor to be of helpfulness. He used that word helpfulness all the time. UNR, urge and recommend, and whatever it was. And they had a machine there that could sign Joe's name better than he could, and he'd rain those letters out. But the big question then was Joe going to vote to impeach Nixon? They'd been in Congress together right after in the late '70s, and he knew how to write the letters. If you wrote one to impeach the SOB, let it go out. Yeah, it's a sacred office, and on and on and on. You could, another letter come in, do not impeach him, and it let it go out. It was always vague, and say, well, it's we've got to proceed very carefully, and that kind of thing. And I'd pick him up sometime. We'd ride together. And I had my office there in the Rayburn building. I got to park next to Joe. That was a big deal. Parking was a big deal, period. But anyway, he said, well, you never know, and he said, well, you know, I may not have to make that decision. I don't know. He was going to vote to impeach him, but sure enough, you know, he never had to.
Right. Now, Howard Baker was up there then at the same time, and was kind of from your area. I mean, a little further east.
Yeah, he lived in Knoxville mostly, right. But he was up from Oneida.
Yeah. Did you get to know him?
A little bit. One of the cases I tried was among the last one. I filed an Astor lawsuit against the mayor of Jamestown, and he represented him. And it's an interesting story, but it'd take too long to tell it. Right. But that was my first acquaintance with him, and then I got acquainted with Ray Blanton there. He and Eddie Edwards, and the Democratic Club was across the old Congressional Hotel, and we was over there a lot, and too much maybe, and they were usually over there.
So Ray Blanton was in Congress from Tennessee, from West Tennessee.
Yes.
Before we talk about Ray and the governor's race that came up after that, you said Joel Evans never had to vote, just for the purposes of the video.
Well, he never had to vote on the impeachment
because
of the resignation.
Because Nixon resigned.
Yeah, Joe had kind of a basic. I don't know what it was, but his basic theory was, don't ever get up any power. And second, don't make a decision on an important subject that you really need to. And it worked pretty well. In 1976, I went through a very short temporary state of insanity there. And you probably know, Joe wanted me to, Joe kind of indicated he'd like me to run for his seat. And I employed the Kraft Research Group. And it was interesting. I could see straight away that I didn't want to do that.
There were several, though, who did run for that
seat. Yeah.
And
the Kraft Research Group, I remember I used to kid, Stanley Rogers ran, and Stanley was a good friend. He was in the legislature, we were good friends. And the poll, I was commissioner of insurance at the time, and all those regulatory boards. And you probably remember it. I had a brochure printed, my gritty picture on it, about 80,000 of them, put every damn one of them in that district. And Stanley was majority leader, and we did the poll, and my name recognition factor was like 6%, and Stanley's wasn't much better, about maybe 6.5. Albert Gore's was 25, because of his father, really.
Because of his father,
and that's
right.
Exactly about the votes he got.
And he was elected then in '76 to take Joel Evans' place.
Yes.
Right. And you'd already come home.
No, in '76 I was living in Nashville.
That's what I mean. All right, let's back up then to '73 is when you left Washington.
That's right.
And tell us what you did.
I even while I was in Washington, I still tried a few lawsuits back home, and several, and Joe didn't object to that, and it was I made whatever a congressman made. I don't remember what it was at the time. It seemed like it was 60,000, 50 or something.
Right.
And so maintaining a place in Washington and home and flying back and forth, it was create a little bit of a negative cash flow, so I had to do a little something.
You have to keep working.
Yeah.
Back home too.
Yeah.
So you got involved in the governor's race in '74.
Right. I'd represented. Ray ran against Baker in '72, and he had a problem on some contributions, particularly in East
Talking
Tennessee.
about Ray Blanton.
Ray Blanton,
ran
I'm
against
sorry.
Howard Baker, right?
Yeah, he ran against, I was for Ray, and of course he didn't have, just got beat bad. But anyway, he really wasn't, God rest his soul, a very good candidate, I didn't think. But we did the best good with him. And I got acquainted, I'd got acquainted with him. He ran in '72, and I was in Washington at the time. And then I left '73, but when he announced for governor, I remember Ray called me and said he was going to run for governor, and I thought, I asked Ray, what are you talking about, man? You just got the hell beat. You got beat 2 years ago, and he said, damn it, I'll show you. And I was for Tom Wiseman, and
That's the first campaign you and I worked on together with Tom Wiseman.
That's right. And Tom Wiseman, I hope he's well now. I haven't seen him lately, but he was my preacher at my wedding, and he told me that federal judges had a little stronger ceremony than ordinary preachers. But he still tells that story. And anyway,
Blanton did get elected.
Blanton got elected on 23% of votes. Stanley I had that voter research poll, and it really reflected if I ran, Stanley would have been elected because Al Gore's strength was largely up that way. And then Bill Hall McFarland, or whatever his name was, the county executive from Murfreesboro ran, and Sarah King and T. Thomas Cottrell from Gallatin. And so he kind of had that upper end to himself. And he won. He didn't win by about 4,000 or 5,000 votes.
Really close. Yeah.
I was for Stanley.
Yeah.
And but back to the governor's race, I didn't really think Blanton was going to win.
But after Blanton got elected, he asked you to be in his cabinet, didn't he?
He did. We were coming back from Washington. We was trying to get that wound down. That it really wasn't judicial. It was first in front of the Secretary of the Senate about a race, and I can't tell you all about I didn't really do much. You wrote some letters and things. The litigation started after that, and Bill Willis and somebody else represented him in that.
Represented Blanton.
Yes,
Right.
in that thing about the contributions, and it was really a Mickey Mouse stuff, I remember Frank Phillips was indicted for letting his people, he's a trucker, nail up signs. Well, and Judge Morton, who, God rest his soul, could be a little tough. And but he just twisted and squirmed, put him on probation, and some of that stuff.
Right, right.
It was.
So you became in '75 the commissioner.
That's right. Blanton was coming back from Washington to wind that thing up, and he asked me if there's anything I'd like to do with state government. And of course, I'd been spoiled being in Washington, and I hated to get back to trying, car wrecks and taking depositions. So
you weren't looking forward to that, so you became commissioner of insurance.
Yeah.
Under Blanton. Well, let's take a break there.
Okay, that's a good spot.
Yeah. Millard, you came back, or moved back, came back from Washington, and became the commissioner of insurance. How did you get that job?
Well, you have to have one vote, and I was actually coming back with Ray Blanton, who was running for governor, and he'd got the Democratic nomination, had beat Lamar Alexander, pretty handy, and he said, Ray used a little coarse language. Told me, God damn it, I told you I was going to win. And I said, you were right. Governor, I was wrong. And he said, now, if there's anything you want to do, I shouldn't put that word in. But anyway, he really said it. He said, if there's something you want to do with state government, and let me know, or something like that. And I looked around, and the only thing, I'd made a decent living suing insurance companies. That was when I practiced law. That's really, I can divide anything by a third in my sleep. And then the last one, when I became a part of Arnold Cameron, we represented some insurance companies, and I quit that because I never had done billable hours. We always did what we called value building. We just we did a good job, we charged more. If we didn't, I mean, how you gonna? Poor people can't pay. You get injured in a car wreck, they can't pay billable hours. That's the only way they can get to the courthouse, is with billable hours. I mean, without billable hours. And I don't think one reason I quit practicing law, I think lawyers got to charging too much, and I'd see the cost of depositions, a lot of waste of time. I remember in the legislature, they passed that code pleading, just postage stamp pleading. I liked the other days. I liked it better before then, when if you filed a lawsuit and I got it to represent the defendant, I started with whatever defenses I might have, a plea and abatement, a demurrer, misjoinder of parties, and all of that kind of thing. I think that system was better.
Right.
It educated the lawyers better, I think. Anyway, where were we? I'm sorry.
So Governor Blanton said, what do you want to do?
And I told him, after a little bit, I called him and told him I wouldn't mind being commissioner of insurance. They had state S&Ls then, and I looked at, that's the only job that I wasn't really qualified for that, but that's the only job. And those jobs usually have professionals there. Roy Bess and some others were there, and they kind of really tended to the store.
They had a pretty professional staff.
They had a very professional
right.
staff, very professional.
You were brought in to be the commissioner, but you kept most of the people who'd been there.
Oh, of course, everybody, except the fire marshal. I would have kept him, but they wouldn't let me.
So you had to replace
Gene Hartsook wanted to be fire marshal, and everybody liked Gene, and so I had to replace him.
Got it. Okay.
Had to replace the existing fire marshal and let Gene have it.
So how long did you stay with the Blanton administration as commissioner?
For the 4-year term.
4-year term. That was in '78.
That's right.
And then, of course, there was the pardons issue and all the crazy, the coup where they had put Governor Alexander in early. And were you in the middle of any of that, or?
No, I was. Although I liked Ray and I enjoyed going to his office late in the afternoon. There's always some people up there talking. But I never could. Those of us that had not supported him in the primary, we were friends, but we affectionately referred to the insiders as the West Tennessee crowd. And don't misunderstand, I like Ray. I think he got partially a bum rap. State's credit rating went up while he was there. If Ray had had a good PR person, he would have done a lot better. I went with him once down to West Tennessee. My first wife, who's deceased now, was from down there, and there's about a building there, a school building or something. And he just got off and jumped on a bulldozer and started up and lowered the blade to the ground. And he could do things like that. He was a road contractor, And if he'd had the right PR person and quit chain smoking and a few things like that, and he had some.
He had a little bit of a drinking issue too, didn't he?
Very much.
And then.
When I wanted something, I know what time of the day to get him. He pointed to some judge or two. At that point, the judge could you could just appoint a judge. The governor could, where there's a vacancy.
So you left office there at the end of '78 or the first of '79, and did you go back to Livingston to practice law?
I did. I was going to. I took two young lawyers, John Moore and Keith Keesley, and Oakley, Keesley and Moore or something, and I just couldn't. I lost my. You see, all I had usually was just plain old knockdown litigation, and I just couldn't, just didn't want to, and told them that, and one went with the Attorney General's office. John Roberts was the district attorney then, and Keith Keesley went to the trust department of bank in Knoxville, and he's now at Equitable Securities.
Mm-hmm. So you ended up with some business interest.
I did.
Then. So tell us, let's leave the law for a minute and talk about radio stations, real estate developments, banking.
Yeah, I got into more entrepreneurial things. I formed a bank, and there was 6 of us. I'm taking too much credit. 6 of us. We had one bank in Overton County, and a good bank, as a matter of fact. And 6 of us formed the First National Bank of Tennessee. At that point in time, it was in order to get a charter, you had to prove a public need and necessity. And after that, why they just got the money, you get a charter. I think it's changed a little bit now, but for a period of time, and then you couldn't branch across county lines. We branched to Cookeville with the first cross line in the state. The state statute, it may still be on the books, that says a bank can't cross the state line, but the case went up from Mississippi on a Me Too kind of thing on an S&L, and they could do it, and the court held that if S&L could do it, the bank could do it. That's the bottom line.
So you started that bank with
I was organizing director. I didn't.
What year was that you?
1965.
65. And now you, that bank is $800 million bank in Cookeville and Crossville and where else?
Livingston, Sparta. But this is interesting. We thought it was too much. They required us to put up $400,000 in capital. $400,000. The other bank, the existing bank, was a $10 million bank.
Wow.
And so we've made some progress since then.
Now you'd have to put up the $10 million to get a charter, I guess.
Yeah, maybe more. And the other people, the other 5 were older than me. Good bit. They had most of the money anyway. I didn't put, but maybe $35,000, $40,000 at that time. And they were older than me, and the natural, course of events taking place. I was the logical person to sell to. And then I'd made some money in the RTC days in the early 80s, and I made some fairly serious money. And I just sent a tender offer, got it appraised and added 25% to it, made a tender offer, and they were all glad to sell it.
So you own that bank now?
Yes.
Lock, stock, and barrel.
I've got there's part of it in my daughter's trust.
Sure.
But yes.
And that's been very successful. You're chairman of the board?
No, I'm just on the board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and our board is more of kind of important people. We run the bank is run by an executive committee, and I'm not on that. Our board is Bob Bell, former president of the university, the current president, Phil Odom, is on the board, Paul Swallows, who's an accountant, John Rose, who you know, and so our board does the statutory requirements. We don't approve loans, anything like that. I've never seen in recent years since we did that, I've never seen a financial statement in the bank other than mine. We made that a policy.
That's pretty unusual too. So,
Yeah.
so that's the bank that you own. Now, what about the radio stations that you have bought and sold over the years?
I've done well. I've had one in Alabama and Greenville, Alabama, and Jamestown, Kentucky, Crossville, Dayton. But they were mostly daytimers.
And you, how'd you get in the radio business?
An engineer owed me some money for a legal fee, and he said, "I'll give you I've got a radio license," and he assigned it to me for his legal fee. Named Cunningham.
Yeah. And so you said most of them were daytimers. Now
FMs, yeah. Back then, you thought of FM music as that music down at the doctor's office, you know, and everybody listens to AM. The AM at home now does pretty good. We run it. We had one in Sheffield, 100,000 water Sheffield WTCV, and is Tennessee Christian Voice. We put it was a Christian format, and we didn't do so good, and we sold it to what's the entertainer Newton?
Jerry Newton.
And we sold. You remember his brother? What was his name? You know, and I don't. Bought the Milky Way thing down there.
Right.
And he made a rocker out of it, and made some pretty good. Did well with it.
Yeah. So do you listen to these radio stations, or do you?
I wouldn't know a transponder from a receiver. You know. I've never worked a day in a bank.
So you mentioned a minute ago that you had made some money in the RTC situation.
I did.
Now, tell them that's the Resolution Trust Company that was created at the time of all the bank crisis.
Just dropping like flies.
And that was in the 80s.
Yes, primarily in the early 80s.
And so tell us about some of the deals you made.
Well, we made so many. I was with a group from Kentucky. I'd sold them a bank in Monticello that had trouble as a result of relationship with the butchers. And we became very good friends. The lawyers couldn't figure it out. Old Diamond, that lawyer at the big firm that Jane Eskin's daddy had. And I finally just wrote him Jess a letter and just said, "We'll just play this by ear and we'll do the right thing." And he said, "That's fine." And we never had it. We went through that whole thing, never had a problem. And he's one of my best friends, and we're partners in real estate and other stuff. And I sued, before CNC sold, I sued CNC, and then the FDIC took it, and I lost the case in the trial court as an individual, and in the, I guess, the Sixth Circuit then in Cincinnati. I lost it on that Title 18 that makes the FDIC a super holder, and when the bank fails, you know. But we bought and sold loans everywhere.
And when I think we need to talk about that just a minute. So when you say the CNC, of course, this was the bank started out owned by the butchers by
city and county bank. Yeah, that's right.
And you had a lot of dealings with them back and forth over those several years, right?
The answer would be yes with some limitation. I got acquainted with them, as I told you. Joe, I went up to see Joe, that was CCH, when Joe was wanting to sell his bank.
Joe Evans.
Yeah, Joe Evans. And I met JJ, I met CH at that bank down on Kingston Pike. He had a floor his office on the second floor, and they hadn't expanded very much. And some way the deal kind of fell between the cracks.
And then you met Jake, who ended up buying the Hamilton Bank.
He did. He bought the Hamilton Bank from, I don't know who he bought it from. I can't remember. But Howard Baker got a $250,000 fee and put it in the Congressional Record. I don't mean he did anything wrong.
Right.
I don't mean to infer that, but in order to, he kind of helped the deal. I can't remember.
But he changed the name to the United American Bank. And
He did.
Because all of those banks collapsed.
They did.
In the 82, 83, 84, 85, and that's where
I met CH in the 70s.
Yeah, okay.
Really.
And you ended up buying some of the bad loans from the FDIC and reselling the properties.
Trading them and selling them and reworking them. And my friend in Kentucky has First Southern National Bank. At that point, they had 5 or 6 little banks. They put them together, and between us, then we could. We bought. I didn't have. It was a big package, but I didn't have. We bought maybe $100 million worth of stuff. My part was 10 or 15 million. It's kind of. I brag about it. It's kind of like we killed a bear, but Daddy shot it. They did most of the work really. I could still look at a title policy and look at a loan jacket and tell you, could tell them a little something about it.
Now, what about some of the other businesses you've been in, real estate? You've been in business over in Hilton Head?
Yeah, I'm in business over there, and I have a house over there. And I've been in several different kinds of things.
And
some successes and some failures.
Right. But you've been an entrepreneur for years, in addition to being a lawyer.
Yeah, I got tired of the law practice a little bit. I never did have a sophisticated practice. I can tell you all kinds of stories about lawsuits that people would just wouldn't think about. Lawyers wouldn't think about. JJ, my wife, told me this morning, said, if they ask you about lawsuits, be sure and tell them about Langford versus Langford.
Okay, tell us about it.
John Turnbull did a brief on this, on the civil end of it, while he was a senior in law school. I didn't know it at the time. I represented, they're both dead now, so I guess it's all right to talk about it. But I represented a woman in a very contentious lawsuit. And it was just, really kind of about to get really messy. And she called me Millard. I didn't really like that. She always said, well, Millard. And this is an absolute true story. I was coming out of the courthouse one day and wasn't in a good mood. And she was kind of walking along with me, going back to the office. Now, Millard, what are we going to do? I told what her husband had done to her. What are we going to do about it? What would you do about it? And I said, I guess I'd shoot the son of a bitch. And I went on. I thought nothing about it. And the next morning, or the following morning, she sat on my steps. I said, Beauty, you're out mighty early or something. She said, well, I did what you said I should do. And after she had left me, she went straight to Spec Hardware. Unfortunately, bought a small gun, a little .32 caliber. He's kind of a fleshy guy. And went home and promptly shot him 2 or 3 times in the middle, but it didn't kill him. If she'd got if she'd had a big caliber, it would have been all over. But she shot him, he lived, and we went. We finally got her off on a battered wife syndrome, and then we fussed over the farm, and it went to the Court of Appeals. It's a reported case. John Roberts and Turnbull, Turnbull, that's when he was senior in law school. They defended it said, we got the judge gave us half the farm. And there's a lot of case law that says that if you try to take the life of your companion, you just can't profit from your ill deed. And so, but some way he danced around that, and the Court of Appeals upheld it. But we went through those trials, and it never came out. I finally told John Roberts about it.
It never came out that you told her?
No, hell no. No. Of course not. But can you imagine that coming out in court? One said, well, I shot my husband. Well, my lawyer told me to. And so that would have been the source of some embarrassment. And But
yes.
that's I was very careful about that from there on. That was those things just happened. Charles, you go back and just little things. I remember one in Jamestown, tough lawsuit, and the jury came back, and Judge Davis, William I. Davis, best circuit judge I ever knew, I believe, till John Turnbull came along, and said, "Gentlemen, have you agreed?" "Yes, sir." He said, "What's your verdict?" He said, "Hung jury." Just things like that would happen.
Well, that's what's fascinating to hear the stories about, what you've been through. Tell us about how the intersection of your legal training really helped with your business development in terms of entrepreneurship.
I'm not sure it helped very much, really. Lawyers have a tendency to look at things in a negative way. Title lawyer looks for something wrong with the title. I think I've never known a lot of lawyers that made money, that quit law and went into business. A lot of them do, and I remember Jim Neal went in that restaurant business and something. I think he's the best lawyer I ever knew, and one of the best, certainly. And we used to, he was a hell of a lawyer, but he didn't do well in business. I think there's been a lot of people like that.
Right. The grass is always greener.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that Jim Neal was a great lawyer. Now, what other great lawyers would you? Who'd be your top 5 that you've seen as lawyers?
That I knew. I got acquainted with Big John Hooker in the legislature. He represented the Eskins and some other people in 1959, and Ralph Kelly from Chattanooga, who was later a bankruptcy judge. I agreed to help with the Fair Trade Whiskey Bill, and it wasn't anything but a price-fixing bill, and nothing fair about it at all. But we passed it, and I got acquainted with Mr. Hooker then. We down Bill Peeler, I think he was there then, and we'd go out to Mr. Hooker Sr. who just had a captivating personality. Just really just.
Well, you got and Jim Neal would be at
and Big list. Jack Norman. I got acquainted with him. United Brewers decided to try to open up those counties up there as a result of some legislation that Mac O'Brien and I passed. See, it was illegal to have a beer, and those if you wanted a beer, you had to go to Cookville. You couldn't get it in Livingston, Jamestown, Byrdstown, and DeKalb County, Macon County, Jackson County. And Mac and I, it was really kind of funny. We passed a bill amending the beer law, and nobody ever knew much about what we were doing. We just changed one word down where they issue the beer permit, and the statute said may issue the permit. We just said change may to shall, and that's a reported case. And I took 3 of them to the Supreme Court, and United Brewers was kind of helping me with that. Big Norman, Big Jack fixed my fees, as a matter of fact. He was the general counsel for that, so I got acquainted with that.
And you won that case.
Yeah.
Legislation changed everything.
We opened them all up. We had those hearings and then go to take a writ of certiorari to court,
What about judges? You mentioned Judge Turnbull was a really good
He was.
judge.
John Mitchell was a great judge. Judge Officer owned the office where I first started practicing law. He was chancellor. And you got to remember that back then a circuit judge or chancellor made $5,000 a year in the early 50s. And we rented from Judge Officer, and my office rent was either $7 or $10 a month. Yes,
really?
Right up there by his office, on the same floor. Now, we didn't have a bathroom, or we didn't have air conditioning, And that got a little old, and so I bought, and Maxie went with me, we bought a little place from a lawyer named Don White, had it forever and ever, who was I never did know him that well, but he had a hell of a reputation. And we bought a little office from him, his office building, $2,500, and we bought it that. And I practiced law. I still own it, but I've practiced law there the years. But I still mixed, like when I was in Washington. I came back and tried a lawsuit or two.
Tell us about the case where you sold the hospital, how you got the hospital.
Well, it was an interesting kind of merger where the hospital was was a profit, and we converted it to a non-profit, so we wouldn't have to. I really better not get into that. Some confidential information.
Okay.
Anyway, Livingston Hospital was the second hospital or third to go in the HCA chain. Dr. Nivens had known Dr. Frist in school or something. I don't remember the details, but we converted it from a non-profit to a profit, and then did a stock swap.
Sold it to HCA.
Yeah, did a stock swap.
Yeah. Now, what's happened to that hospital now? Is it still open?
No. They've dealt it into these mergers and things. They don't own it now.
Yeah. But is it still open now?
Oh, sure.
Well, it's unusual for some of these small hospitals.
Yeah, it was. I got some lettered stock. It's selling. I sold it way too soon, but I made a lot of money for that point in time.
Yeah. Now you continue to work today.
I don't do any legal work much. Somebody will come in and I'll write a deed or something. I don't know. I've quit. No, not any real legal work. I don't have any that bar number and special account and all that. This will sound strange to you and to anybody now. I practiced all those years. I never had any errors or omissions insurance, any malpractice insurance. In all those years, I never thought about it.
They just didn't do that out in the country.
No. I mean,
in all those small towns.
No, nobody bought professional insurance. I don't think the doctors did very much.
You ever been sued for legal malpractice?
No, sir. Never had a threatening letter about that.
Let's take a break and eat, and then I want to talk about.
We're about to wind down, aren't we? Anyway, I can just go on and on. But it's hard to. Are we off?
Yeah. Millard, I want to ask you about your benevolence, and you've been blessed with a lot of opportunities and financial rewards. Tell us, and I know this is hard, as modest as you are, but tell us about what you've chosen to do with some of the money you've made.
Well, you're right. I've done a lot better than I deserve, for sure, financially and other ways. But when you get a little older and you had the good luck to make a little money, maybe you have to think about a little bit about what to do with it and what you would like to do with it. You mentioned the library there in Livingston. I didn't put up all the money. I put up a good portion of it, but I didn't put up all of it.
For a new public library.
Yes, and they needed one in Livingston bad.
Right.
They had a little old piece of a building, and it gets the use now for these kids. We just didn't have one.
That's great. That's great. And then you've been very generous with Tennessee Tech.
Well, I donated my farm to them. It helped with the STEM center there. I didn't. There's not a dime of Tennessee taxpayers' money. Bart Gordon got a lot of it from the science committee, and then I put in a pretty significant amount.
Some of these people are not going to know what STEM center means, but that's to help young people.
Yes, and even teenagers. They've got something they call a STEM mobile and all of that stuff. And it's more of a science thing. They bring college students too, but they bring students in from the surrounding areas there for training.
And you have that center is in Livingston?
No, it's on the Tech campus.
On the Tech campus. But there's something in Livingston for one of the colleges, isn't it?
Vol State.
Vol State. And you had something to do with that?
Well, I helped with that. And that's the one that we had a lot of trouble with. And finally getting it built. And some way the State Building Commission, Governor Bredesen, maybe helped us a little bit on that.
Open that on
campus.
In
Livingston. Yeah, it's really needed. There's people that go to Vol State in Livingston that are a little intimidated about the university campus and things, and you'll see it's just they go there now they go to Tech, but they're a little bit intimidated. Now they can go without any tuition, and they put mine and JJ's name on the administration building or something.
But
I put in some.
There was some financial help there that you all gave to make that possible.
Sure.
So that's.
But not. It wasn't anywhere. It was. I guess it was significant, but it wasn't my. I didn't build the whole building.
Yeah, I understand. But so, why Vol State? Why Tennessee Tech? How did you choose to help them?
Well, the thing I did earlier this year, I live on a fairly substantial farm there in Overton County, and I gave it to Tech. That's why they named the agriculture building and put my name on that. Really, it's on the quad there, and it's been. I just didn't want it cut up, and the School of Agriculture can't ever compete probably with UT. They could be the UT is going to always be maybe the Coca-Cola, and then Tech could be the Pepsi-Cola or something,
Good. Well, Tennessee Tech is right there at home too. I mean, right in your.
And I didn't donate the house we live in. There's about 1,500 acres I did.
Tell us about the house you live in. That's a nice place in Livingston. You got a nice house there, you and JJ.
Adequate house, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, tell us about some of the boards that you've been on, because that's a whole different avenue of work for some lawyers to serve on. You've been on the bank board and been on corporate boards.
Well, I have. You want me to talk about the times I've been sued, or?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Seriously, Thomas Nelson, I was on that board and executive committee for 30 years or so. Mr. Jackson.
How'd that happen?
I really don't know. I bought some stock, and David Wiley and David Patterson were good friends, and Sam Moore, I got introduced to Sam Moore, and they asked if I'd like to serve on the board. And I'd bought some stock, a pretty good little piece of stock for me. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like the rest of them, but it was for me. And then when we sold it, I was on the committee to do it, and we got so sued. George Barrett, and some California guy, said we sold it too cheap, and I don't think they were right about it. And the lawsuit kind of went away.
There was some D&O insurance probably involved in that case.
No, not in that. This was just that we sold it too cheap. We didn't. Well, I don't know. We might have, but it never went to trial. Bob Walker represented me, and we never wasn't tried or anything.
Right.
It was just filed.
There
was a lot of those lawsuits. I was on an insurance company, United Physicians International. All the board members, except me and Henry McCall, we were just lawyers, and the rest of them were all doctors and lawyers. And, if you can imagine, and so it promptly went broke. And not promptly, but it was to insure physicians. And
right.
We stayed in litigation of that forever. And
Bob Walker was your lawyer. Of course, he's from your neck of the woods.
He is.
Monterey.
I used to, his daddy, in Monterey, between Bill Turner Ray, who was Jack's father, and the Walkers, Walker Hardwood Lumber, and Jack Ray's father, they owned about everything's worth owning in Monterey at one time. Had the flooring plant and everything. But I've been on the insurance board and the home office used to be in Springfield, Ohio. And I've been on several bank boards, some successes, some failures. On Farmers Board.
And you've been on the Board of Regents?
Yes, I have.
Tennessee for several years, right?
Yeah, Governor Bredesen appointed me to the Board of Regents, and I served. I didn't finish my term out, and then recently they changed the system in Tennessee to separate the universities from the community colleges and the tech center, and the 6 universities have their separate boards now, and they kind of run locally, and each board voting members, I think, are 8 of us or something like that.
The Tennessee Tech Board.
Yeah, our governor has them appointed. The governor appointed the boards, and he appointed me to that board. And if the other boards are all over, I know part of the other people, but
sure.
The theory is that with local control there, that the Board of Regents should be in Memphis one day and Johnson City the next, and pretty well scattered. There were certain advantages, I think, to the Board of Regents, but and maybe the jury is still out. I don't know, but I think it looks going to be all right.
Now, obviously, you've told us your date of birth. How old are you now?
87.
And what are you doing every day now?
Get up every morning, go to work wherever I am. I sleep till 5:30, and up, have breakfast at 6:30.
You doing some traveling? Tell us about some of the. Where have you been? What's your favorite place?
Well, I don't know. We've been to a little too many places. I forget where all, but we've. I never saw I could vote before I saw the ocean, I think, and I know I could, and so I never did have the opportunity. I went through college. I never had a car. It's kind of awkward. You got a girl you have to say, do you want to walk to a movie and all of that? But a lot of people didn't. But I didn't. I rented Hazelwood swimming pool in the summers, and we sold hot dogs and snow cones. I lived over the kitchen out there. It was nice in the winter, but it's a little warm in the summer.
Now, you've lived in Livingston all your life, back and forth, but you also have had a residence in Nashville at one time, and Atlanta, and
I have a place in Atlanta and Hilton Head. Yeah.
And at Hilton Head. So,
yeah.
And
that's primarily because I have some business to take care of there.
Right. Now, do you want to tell us what kind of business you have in Hilton Head?
It's real estate oriented, dry stack storage, and a boat dealership, and that kind of thing.
So, you've been. What do you do? Are you a reader?
I read all of John Grissom's books,
okay.
And about to start on one. It's a takeoff off after that movie Mississippi Burning.
Yes.
It's a sequel kind of that. I've got it laying on my desk. I've read most of Gladwell's books. Outliers and those. I like that kind. I don't read a lot of pulp fiction, but some.
But you like Norman Gladwell?
I do. I think he's an interesting author.
He really is interesting.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that more offline. But
yeah,
he's pretty fascinating. So, anything we haven't talked about that you want to?
Not that I can think of. That
you want to say?
Not that I can think of. Appreciate the honor of. I can't imagine why the bar would have an interest in me giving an interview as many prominent big lawyers has been. I've never had a lot of big lawsuits. Mine just always. I've had one or two pretty good.
The only problem you have is you're too modest. So we thank you, and this has been a fun conversation.
It has been.